I'm Henk Ovink, Special Envoy for International Water Affairs and Sherpa to the High-Level Panel on Water. I look forward to talk to you about, of course, water and climate risks, but also opportunities, because this is what the world is facing in the context of the challenges of climate. They're only increasing and becoming worse, but it's not only a doom and gloom. We can do something about it, but we only have to know how. And water, in that sense, can be a real inspiration. I'll take you around the world, showing you the world in its full capacity. I start with an image taken by Apollo 17 in 1972. It's called the Blue Marble, and it actually shows the world in its full capacity. A lot of water, and that's true. Over 70% of the world's surface is covered with water. But now I take this big vacuum cleaner. I take all the water the world has off, and then what's left is not all of a sudden a Swiss cheese. We still see the sphere of the planet, but there is not a lot of water left. And if we put all the water of the planet into another sphere, it's only a small bulb. So when you thought water was abundant, because the surface of the planet is covered with water, but there's actually not a lot. And we, of course, experience this with the pandemic. We say every day, wash your hands, but with billions of people around the world lacking access to not only safe drinking water, but also sanitation and hygiene facilities, that first line of defense is absent. And if you then add up climate-related challenges with water, health, security, conflict, urbanization, slums, inequality, and across, you see a stacking of these challenges in the places that are most vulnerable and where disasters, crises, of course, hit hardest. Most vulnerable around the world are hit hardest, but also have the hardest time to get back on their feet. Now, jumping to climate, we've seen disasters in 2018 of too much, too little, and polluted water, 2019, 2020, all the way until this summer, where Europe was flooded, in Germany, Belgium, and even my own country, the Netherlands. And at the same time, we saw wildfires and unprecedented heat waves all the way up to Canada. There is no single way forward. That's what we know. Houston, we have a problem. No, white, old, male engineers won't deal with this challenge. We have to come up in a very inclusive and comprehensive approach. And the youth out there knows it. They're crying for a solution, an approach, you better say, where we match the different worlds. Match the different worlds where Secretary Guterres of the UN already called on us. A time for science and solidarity, he said. Science in its full capacity of wanting to understand all those interdependencies, and solidarity, really working with everybody, leaving no one behind. Not only taking care of the most vulnerable, but including everyone in an approach to that future. And if we talk about understanding and we look at climate and the actions we want to provoke, planning and design are of critical importance in that. And there is no other report than the Climate Change and Land report from the IPCC best explains this. Amidst a myriad of reports that's coming from the IPCC is stressing the importance of climate action and putting the agenda that it is now or never. The Climate Change and Land report lays out the land, you could say. It tells us that the majority of our investment is increasing climate change, making us more vulnerable. But at the same time, the way how we invest, the way how we plan our cities, our infrastructure, our industries, is destroying, again, that resiliency, that sustainability capacity the planet holds. So we increase climate change and we make ourselves more vulnerable. And we're off track. 1.5 degree is, even after Glasgow COP, still on the table, but we have a hard time catching up on the promises. And we see that through floods, droughts, and disasters across the world, causing migration patterns and hitting our cities first and foremost. Cities are at the forefront of climate change impact. And when it comes to global flood losses in coastal cities, they will tenfold in 2050 to over $500 billion of $52 billion a year, costing $1 trillion a year on estimate. It's these cities, spearheaded by Miami, Guangzhou, New York, and beyond, that are at the forefront, but also where inequalities, when it comes to the impacts of climate change, are most present. It's a matter of health, biodiversity, and beyond. So if we take this all together and we look at how we live as a world, you could say that we, overuse our natural resources to make ourselves more vulnerable. I put it in a graph where we look back and say the challenges were overseeable, we could understand them, and our single focused approach by matching a problem with a solution actually was enough. That led us now to a time where we look at the future that is really challenging, where the stacking of challenges on climate, impacts of climate change, urbanization and inequality is only making our future more uncertain. And the solutions of the past are not the answer for the problems of tomorrow. We really have to change course. Not for nothing did we draft 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 and came up with a Paris Agreement that really tells the world to limit global warming to 1.5 degree post-industrial levels and act on climate now. Adaptation and mitigation going hand in hand. COP26 in Glasgow repeated that story, that the solutions of the past are not a guarantee for a sustainable future of tomorrow. Business as usual is not enough. It's not only not enough, it's becoming lethal. So we have to move away from this non-responsive, moving from crisis to crisis approach, where single-focused investment actually created more problems. We even have to step away from a reactive approach, where we say a disaster is an opportunity for a temporary solutions. Band-aid approaches, layer upon layer, that build a bit of redundancy, but not prepare us for a challenging and uncertain future. We have to become radically proactive, really looking at future challenges and embracing them as a best opportunity to change course. And with that, a lot of you might think that is about the projects, the investments we need. And that is of course true. The trillions that we spend on infrastructure all have to change course. But that starts with focusing on the people and their institutions, in collaborations, in building capacity, with clear commitment, really focusing on an enabling environment that has individual, professional, and institutional capacity. The millions we need to spend on the people and their institutions will safeguard the billions we spend on our infrastructure. Invest in the process, the economists say, because if you maximize opportunities, the performance of those opportunities only becomes higher. And water is a clear inspiration for that, you could say, a lesson to that. If you invest in water, it trickles down across all those sustainable development goals. If you invest in water, you bring the stakeholders and partners together, because water touches upon every aspect of life and society. Water is about health. It's about great cities, about energy and food security. It's about equality and education. It's about climate mitigation and adaptation. It's about biodiversity and changing and mitigating biodiversity loss, and so forth. Investing in water trickles down across the SDGs and brings all partners and stakeholders to the table. And that is where we want it. But for that, we need to understand water's complexity and its amazing opportunity to bring us together. Start to value water across all those sustainable development goals, across cultural, environmental, economic, and ecological matters, and start to manage it. Really inclusive across all scales, layers, and against interest. And to do this, we need to be inspired. We need an approach, a way forward that tells us and shows us that what needs to be done in the context of these global challenges also can be done. And for that, we need planning and design, because we need to look at the long term in this very comprehensive way. and work on the short term in innovative approaches. Do this with everybody, inclusive, collaboratively, in a way that is transparent and accountable so we can learn. And with this long-term comprehensive approach, connected to short-term innovative projects, with all and by all in transparency, we build capacity. Capacity that is institutional as well as individual. To bring this together, we need design. Now, why design? Design has three critical components, you could almost say. Design is solution-oriented. It's innovative, catalytic, and pragmatic by nature. It wants to solve. But at the same time, design cuts across almost everything. It has the capacity to connect. It is by nature comprehensive. It cuts across scales, times, and interests. Brings together the different sectors in life. But as a third layer, and a capacity design brings, and in the context of what we need hope, a perspective we can believe in, design is political. It tells from aspiration and inspiration that the world we want is also possible. That comes out of a need, a confrontation of the challenges we face now. So design helps us provoke from this political perspective, drives the solutions that we need now into a pipeline of projects and interventions, investments that have the capacity to connect across scale, time, and interest, and makes it possible to deal with those future challenges and not look back. Now, if I look at the Netherlands, we have quite a bit of a challenge. And we need that level of design to provoke that future. Because if we add everything up, the Netherlands in 100 and 200 years will definitely not be the place that it is now. And to be able to use design, planning, and those provocations, we need a process that really builds trust and capacity across all stakeholders. That is the process where some call it a theory U, a safe space or soft space. Houghton called it the soft space. A space where there is a time and place to work together. A time and place to come together, besides the differences we have. Bringing people and their institutions around the same table in a collaborative manner is of critical importance to not per se overcome the differences, but at least start to understand them and get to a common ground of collaboration. That's what we did in many places around the world. And this is also more or less how the Netherlands was made. The Netherlands is a country made out of water. 1/3 of the country below sea level, 60% flood prone, and a place where water is life. We turned water into land, and we overcome those challenges by default in disaster through collaborations. Collaborations that were institutionalized already in the 12th century, and where water was a critical cultural component, where we built our cities out of water and created a governance system, institutional layers, where water is of critical import. A fourth layer in our constitution are the regional water authorities, safeguarding water quality, as well as the management of water. And it's not only about too much, it's also about the quality of water for agriculture, food security, our industry, to swim in, for biodiversity and recreational purposes. And of course, it is about our resiliency capacity in the context of the challenges we face and faced. 1953, of course, the major disaster in the Netherlands that helped us understand again how vulnerable we are, but also how we can actually build for a better future. Coastal protection, where we build with nature and secure that multifunctional designs, really looking at nature-based solutions, prevention measures, and investing in public space can safeguard the communities on the coast. Investments done 100 years from now being redesigned, like this afsluitdijk, the barrier in our IJsselmeer, our Zuiderzee, that closed off that sea to protect the majority of the Netherlands against flooding, but also closed off riverine stream, and therefore preventing fish and sweet and salt water to have a good interaction. We're now building the largest fish migration river the world has ever seen to make sure that these type of infrastructures not only adapt to climate, but also adapt to the needs on biodiversity. And in 1995, where we evacuated 250,000 people in our delta, because flood, meltwater and rainwater coming in from upstream, we re-envisioned our riverine system, understanding that the river is not a canal, that it is not about transporting goods, but that it actually is a living mechanism, a pillar, a resilient pillar in our sustainable delta, making room for the rivers in our countryside, for nature, the environment, and farms, as well as close to our cities with amazing public spaces, like here in Nijmegen. And preventing risks for the cities downstream, like here in Rotterdam, the Eendrachtspolder, where this recreational space and this world championship rowing facility also is a water storage facility for over 4 million cubic meters of water. To the smallest scale in our neighborhoods, where we take the tiles out of the street, regreen our cities, not only to adapt to too much water or periods of heat and drought, but also mitigate in the context of climate change. We have to look at that future in a very comprehensive way. Be ready with response and disaster management for the times when things go wrong, like last summer. Plan our cities, our infrastructure, and our investments according to that future orientation. And of course, protect with nature-based solutions and dams, dikes, and levees, our infrastructure and our communities across. For too much water, but also not enough water. Our adaptation plans deal with the extremes on the different sides on the two sides of that coin. Seeing 2 years of droughts being followed by 1 year of floods. And the Netherlands is not only a country in Europe, we are a kingdom also in the Caribbean. So we share the burden of small island and development states, like for instance with Hurricane Irma, not only hitting the Caribbean and also Sint Maarten. We came up with an innovative approach to really help build resiliency and redundancy, not only in Sint Maarten and the coast. And that leads me to my role as a water envoy, where I walk the talk across the world, working together with communities at risk of too much, too little, or polluted water. Work with institutional partners in those countries, cities, and regions, from there and across, to really help build understanding in those challenges, as well as develop opportunities in the context of water security, climate action, and adaptation, for finance, for partnerships, and collaboration. With a clear focus on deltas, but also with the need for high-level awareness, setting up a high-level panel on water, as well as helping to create a global commission on adaptation, institutionalizing a global center on adaptation, and bringing, in the context of climate action, water to the forefront of the agenda, all the way to COP26, and from COP towards the United Nations next year, in 2023, where for the second time in the history of the UN, for the first time since 1977, at the highest level of the UN, we will have a UN 2023 water conference, a summit that will bring the world together on water and hopefully spur action across, action that the world needs. Those solutions that stem from this comprehensive and innovative approach in the places that are challenged and battered by climate change have to drive institutional change across the planet. And it's these partnerships of people that can help inform the measures we have to take to become more resilient. And this partnership approach is not only something I learned by working in the Netherlands and across, but that also was more or less provoked in the context of Hurricane Sandy hitting the New York region in the fall of 2012. Sandy hit a region that was vulnerable to floods, where infrastructure suffered, but also vulnerable communities. So it was not only critical infrastructure that was in the worst place in the context of such a disaster. You saw an increase in inequality because of that flood happening across. And that in a region where governance is fragmented and sometimes even biased. And then with a federal approach that was very comprehensive, led by President Obama and his Hurricane Sandy rebuilding task force, and an agreed upon budget of 60 billion disaster recovery funding for that region. So you could say a massive disaster where a lot of people lost a lot with the fragmentation and a distrust on the ground, and where we have had to bridge as a Sandy task force this amazing capacity we brought in with fragmentation and real vulnerability on the ground. I found this sign, we all hate you, Sandy. That was a real emotional hatred. Losing everything in such a disaster does not build trust in the context of a federal government bringing in dollars. You have to understand that the moment you see a disaster as an opportunity, that you have to overcome this cultural gap, this gap between the real loss on the ground and your capacity, the willingness that you want to change and prepare for the future. People that lost everything want to go back. And building resiliency is about that future. And you have to overcome that gap. That's what we did with Rebuild by Design. A competition where we matched local community and their needs, activists that were active on the very local scale, with expertise from across the region, institutional capacity from across the region, with expertise from across the world. Building coalitions and team in a safe space, a process that had time, real time to invest in each other, build understanding of the region's vulnerabilities and opportunities, and develop solutions in a challenge approach that really provoked the future. Inspiring the people that lost everything, that there is still hope, that everything we can do now is a layer, a foundation for a future they can believe in. With 10 teams, we worked across the region, working on reinventing the swamp as a sponge that could deal with not only floods, but also water quality and environmental quality, creating a safe space and healthy city for all. On Long Island, these perpendicular river, creating room for the river like we do in the Netherlands, but then one by one, ensuring that there's a resilient and redundant system. Working on Manhattan, protecting Manhattan with a very comprehensive approach, matching local needs tailored to that real local vulnerability with infrastructure that protected the whole of Manhattan. In Hoboken, coming up with a comprehensive plan that looked at resisting the water, delaying it with greening public space, storing it with more capacity in parks, and discharging it with a new pump system. The food market in Hunts Point, vulnerable to flooding, but with a myriad of solutions, nature-based solutions, protecting it. And last but not least, on Staten Island, with the SCAPE team, working on protective measures built by and with nature that helped reduce impact of any storm, including these hurricanes, but also increasing biodiversity and habitat opportunities for all. We selected 6 +1 winning designs, implemented them with $1 billion disaster recovery money, and scaled the competition to the rest of the United States with the National Disaster Resiliency Competition. After that, we scaled it to Africa and Central Asia as a challenge to build resiliency in a resiliency partnership. Brought it to the Bay Area and San Francisco, where 9 teams worked on resiliency opportunities. And I brought it to Asia, where I developed the concept of water as leverage, water as a springboard for resilient cities Asia. Coming out of an assessment of vulnerabilities in these cities in the context of urbanization and climate change, really looking at those vulnerabilities and turning the project proposal approach from a linear one to a very circular one, where again, creating time and space for communities and experts to work together on the ground on solutions. 16, the cities of Chennai in India, Khulna in Bangladesh, and Semarang in Indonesia each had 2. And I explained the city of Chennai's team's approach, where the current system is based on water scarcity, where water that falls flows into the sea, where the aquifer is over-extracted and polluted, but also is becoming more saline with sea level intrusion, where the surface of the city of Chennai, over 10 million people, is only hardened, and any water that falls is either polluted and goes into the aquifer or is just flowing into the sea. And where, because of an increase in demand, because of economic and demographic growth, government has to build desalination plants to pump more water into that system. A defaulting approach that will only create more vulnerability, a bigger carbon footprint, and in the context of floods and droughts, more dependency from resources outside of that city. But there's an opportunity the 1000 Tanks team led by Oes, our architects, developed. By turning this system based on scarcity into a closed loop system. A system where flood prevention, drought prevention, sanitation, and improved urban environment go hand in hand, with measures that are based on nature's systems capacity. Going back into the culture of these historic places with revitalizing historic tanks that capture the water and bring it back to the aquifer, building new tanks, develop and redevelop forestry, renaturalize canals and rivers, develop bioswales and constructed wetlands, combine solid and liquid waste recycling, and adapt buildings for future tests. Those interventions tick many boxes, and this is exactly what needs to be done. Investing in water, using it as a leverage, as a springboard, as a catalyst for sustainable development and climate action is not only about water. It's about resiliency and sanitation and health. It's about biodiversity, but also economic opportunity, securing heritage and recovering it, reducing carbon, and improving an environment of urban development. Those are the approaches that can start small. We're building a schoolyard now where every aspect of such an approach is being implemented with the school, the kids, and the community around. And from that school, we'll scale it to schools in Tamil Nadu and India. And from that school scale, we'll build it to the neighborhood and then all the way across China. One example from water is leverage, where many examples across Chennai, Khulna, and Semarang now bring us to Vietnam, Indonesia, Colombia, and Europe. An approach that got us a winning award to ensure that we continue to scale up these efforts. Is this enough? No. We have to continue scaling up and replicate the mechanisms that work. The projects that really tick all the boxes, the 1% of the world that is looking at the future. We have to turn 1% into 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 16, and then a majority. We have to put our money where our heart is. There is no silver bullet for this. There's no one answer. We have to tailor this city by city, community by community, watershed by watershed. But it's a necessity to be able to deal with water quality, floods, and droughts. And it's the opportunity to step up our efforts now, like Secretary General Guterres says. I wrote a book on my adventures post-Hurricane Sandy in the US with the Obama task force. And I came up with the conclusions that climate change is not only too big to ignore, it is our biggest challenge and opportunity ever. It is too big to simplify. We can't go in single focus solutions. We have to go all out on embracing that complexity and come up with comprehensive approaches. It's too big for our system, so we have to create a free place that is soft and able to build trust, and do this with everyone to be radically inclusive, and use the power of design to combat fragmentation and come up with inspiration and aspiration. And we can do that now. We must change course now. And I believe, like these two girls in Semarang, Indonesia, believe that there is a future for all if we act accordingly. Thank you.